Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review covers the Chase Elliott number 24 NASCAR Chevy SS 124 scale Revell kit, number 854222. Now, Chase Elliott has been very successful as a young man in the NASCAR circuit, and in fact he was named the Rookie of the Year in the Cup Series in 2016. Now, this kit was released in 2017 and includes a driver figure and is a skill level 5 model for the advanced builder. That's due to the many fragile parts and large decals. Now, the pieces are molded in white, clear, soft black tires, metal axles, and water slide decals. There's 104 pieces and nice instructions. When you're finished, it's about 8 1/4 inches long, 3 1/4 inches wide, and 2 1/4 inches high. Here are the contents of this kit, and just to save you some time, this is my version of the open box review. It'll only take you about 10 seconds. The decals are very colorful, and some of them are quite large. You'll probably want to consider using some of the aftermarket setting solutions to help them conform to contours. As we're building the kit, we'll generally use liquid cement, sometimes super glue for fragile parts, and occasionally where there's window glass, some white glue or crystal clear for that. Now, remember to use all of the manufacturer's safety suggestions for any of the products that you see or hear used in the review. Construction starts with the engine halves and the block there. So go ahead and grab those pieces and the oil pan. Put the two block halves together and attach the oil pan. And then the rocker covers are attached to the left and the right engine halves. And then the whole assembly is painted aluminum. Now we can get these pieces and add the intake manifold, the fuel rails, and the injectors. And they're painted aluminum too. And then the fuel rails are detailed with some clear yellow acrylic, and both cylinder heads are painted gloss black. The fuel rails and the injection unit are attached to the intake manifold, and the cylinder head is attached to the rocker cover, and the same thing for the other side, both sides. And then the intake manifold assembly is attached to the top of the engine assembly. Grab these pieces, and the right exhaust header and the alternator are painted aluminum, and the main belt is flat black. Now the alternator can be attached to the front of the engine assembly, and the main belt is attached to the alternator at the front of the engine. The right exhaust header is then attached to the left side of the cylinder head, and the right exhaust header should actually be the left exhaust header, but the instructions have the part numbers backwards, so just keep that in mind when you're putting this assembly together. Next, the starter is painted semi-gloss black, and the oil pump belt is painted flat black. Now the oil pump and the left exhaust header can be painted aluminum, and the starter can be attached to the right side of the transmission. The oil pump then is installed on the right side of the oil pan, and the oil pump belt can be attached to the oil pump and the main belt assembly. Now add the left exhaust header to the right side, which of course is the right exhaust header. But once again, the numbers were switched on the instructions. So just keep that in mind when you're putting these together. Find these parts and paint the front suspension unit a light gray, and then both of the coil springs are painted semi-gloss black. And then both of the front coil springs can be attached to the front suspension in their pods. Now, this is a copyright logo on the chassis, and you can remove that just by scraping it off or sanding it off with some light sandpaper. Now we can work with the frame and some of the rear suspension parts. And the oil tank and the rear shock then are painted testers aluminum, and both rear coil springs are semi-gloss black. The rear shock can be detailed with some clear yellow acrylic, and the chassis can be painted a light gray. Now the oil tank, rear shock, and both rear coil springs are attached to the chassis. And the front suspension then assembly can be attached to the chassis at the other end. Find these parts in the kit, including the rear axle, and paint that graphite metallic. And then the rear axle front side is painted with some gloss red. The rear control arm assembly is light gray. Now the box art shows part of the rear control arm detailed with what looks like some gloss black or semi-gloss black, and the rear axle front is attached to the rear axle. Then the rear axle assembly can be attached to the rear control arm assembly. Next, the rear control arm assembly can be installed into the chassis, and both the rear coil springs and the rear shocks as well. The drive shaft is painted gloss white and detailed with some aluminum, and the drive shaft can be slid into the chassis and attached to the rear axle's front. And the drive shaft guard is painted light gray and then attached to the chassis over the drive shaft. The rear track bar and its brace are painted light gray, and then the rear track bar is attached to the rear control arm assembly, and the rear track bar brace then attached to the track bar and the chassis. Locate the brakes and the front A-arms here, and then paint the A-arms a semi-gloss black, and the brake pads plates are painted a graphite metallic. Now the right upper A-arm is attached to the suspension on the right side, and the left likewise. Now the rear brake, left rear, and the right rear brake are attached to the rear axle. Now the front brake calipers and rotors there can be attached to the front suspension on the spindles. I'll go ahead and get the engine assembly that we had worked on earlier. And just as a reminder, scrape off any paint or chrome plating from any of the surfaces that you're going to join with glue, because they won't stick well if you don't. And go ahead, find the locating blocks for the engine and install that into the chassis assembly. Now take the exhaust, and we're going to paint the side flares there a gloss black, and then the forward portion that attaches to the engine a flat black, and install that to the headers and underneath the body. Now we'll use the firewall pieces here and the pedals to install the next step. And the firewall, the frame, they're painted light gray, and the tank is gloss white. The pedal assembly will be painted flat black, and the brake master cylinder, it gets painted gloss white and detailed with some aluminum. Then the firewall frame, brace, tank, and brake master cylinders are attached to the engine compartment of the firewall, and the pedal assembly is attached to the inside on the interior of the firewall. Using some of the liquid cement, go ahead and attach the firewall assembly to the chassis assembly. Get the parts you see here and paint the gear shifter gloss red, and some detailing with some flat black. And then the fire extinguisher is gloss red too. Now the seat gets painted semi-gloss black. So then the shifter, the fire extinguisher, and the seat are attached to the chassis assembly. Grab the steering box and the linkage there and paint that aluminum, and after that's dry, go ahead and attach it to the chassis assembly and the firewall in the location provided. The auxiliary oil tank line gets painted flat black and detailed with some aluminum, and then it's attached to the left rear of the chassis assembly, and the top of the fuel cell is painted light gray before it is glued onto the chassis assembly too. Now the box art shows the fuel cell top is gloss red and gloss black, which I think would add some more detail to the kit, so it's your choice on the colors. We'll go to the back, and the rear firewall gets painted gloss black on one side and light gray on the other, and the kicker bar assembly is painted light gray too. Now the fuel filler tube is painted flat black and detailed with some aluminum, and the kicker bar assembly can be attached to the rear section of the chassis assembly. Now the fuel filler tube can be attached to the top of the fuel cell, and the rear firewall can be put into place to the kicker bar assembly in the chassis. So grab the right side of the roll cage and the sidewall there that's attached to that, or will be, and then they get painted light gray, and then attach those to the chassis assembly on the right side. Now we'll use the rear of the roll cage assembly, and we'll paint that light gray, and then it can be attached to the side that's in place in the kicker bar assembly. Paint the center support brace light gray, and the air vent hose is semi-gloss black. Then the center support brace can be attached to the right right roll cage side, the chassis assembly, and the roll cage rear. And then the air vent hose is attached to the right roll cage side and the center support brace. Now we'll work with the left cage side, and that gets painted light gray also, and detailed with some flat black for the net. And then the left roll cage side can be attached to the chassis assembly and the roll cage rear at the location point. Let's work on the driver figure here. Just attach the front and back body halves together, arms and the head and the helmet. And then we're going to paint the entire thing a metallic blue and detail with some testers aluminum and flat black. You can see from this and from the box art how those colors are applied. And then add the decals, most of the sponsor and logo decals, to the figure and let it dry. Paint the center bar light gray, and then it's attached to the right roll bar cage side and the left. It's the brace there. So the driver then can be installed into the seat. Grab the dashboard and wheel there, and we're going to paint the dashboard flat black and then detail that with some testers gloss red and some silver. And then decal 34 is applied to the dashboard. And the steering wheel gets painted semi-gloss black and detailed with some aluminum. And the tack is painted aluminum, and decal 33 is added to that. Now the tack can be attached to the steering wheel, and then the steering wheel goes into the dashboard. Remember to scrape off any paint where you're going to glue the parts together, and add the dashboard assembly into the chassis. Working with these pieces, paint the roll cage top and the front frame V-brace light gray, and then the rear view mirror gets painted semi-gloss black and detailed with some aluminum. And the mirror then is attached to the top of the roll cage, and the roll cage top assembly can be attached to the chassis assembly now, and the front frame V-brace can be attached to the right and left roll cage sides and the firewall. Next, grab the front shocks, and we're going to paint those aluminum with some yellow acrylic for detailing, and then attach that the shocks to the front suspension on both the left and right side, and also to the left roll cage bar there that comes across. Now go ahead and assemble the radiator back to the fan, and then that gets painted aluminum set aside to dry. And then the lower radiator hose gets painted aluminum with some metallic blue for detailing, and the upper is likewise painted gloss black with some metallic blue for detailing. The lower radiator hose can be attached then to the right side of the radiator, and the upper is attached to the left side of the radiator. And now the whole thing can be put into place into the chassis assembly, and the radiator hoses are then attached to the engine. Next, get the air cleaner box, and that gets painted semi-gloss black and then allowed to dry before attaching that to the fuel injection unit on the engine. Paint the wheels, tires, and axle pins, and paint the inner and outer wheels gloss black. And then an axle is slid into the inner wheel, protruding outward, and then the inner wheel can be installed into a tire, and the outer wheel slid onto the tire and glued into place against the inner wheel. So repeat that for the other 3 tire assemblies. Using some super glue on the end of the axle assemblies or tips there, go ahead and install the 4 tire assemblies onto the chassis assembly, and the metal axles just slide into their positions, and that's a nice fit. Just make sure that the tire continues to rotate as the glue sets. Now we can work on the body, and it's a very nice, clean, crisp mold, and you're just going to remove the brace there in the hood area, and remove any blemishes, parting lines that you find. And what I did was I painted the body yellow, and then I masked off the back end, which is going to remain yellow, and painted the rest of the body with a Tester's metallic blue spray. And there's a few areas that will be touched up with some gloss black, like the spoiler in the back, etc. And then you let that all dry, and then you apply your decals. Now, some of these are very large, so use plenty of warm water to put them into location. Once you've got them in the right position, either use some setting solutions or some more warm water to make sure that they fit into all the crevices and details. And then go ahead and squeeze out, any trapped water or air that's under the decals, and if needed, add some more water or setting solution to set those into position. Let those dry overnight, and then give the body a clear coat to seal the decals into position. Next, we're going to glue the rear window and the airfoil into position using some clear part cement or white glue, and some window maker if necessary to fix that into position with some clear glues. Now the rear spoiler gets painted semi-gloss black and then attached to the trunk of the body. Again, use glue sparingly. Make sure you don't use too much. I'll grab the side windows here, and as you can see, they are nicely detailed with the black perimeter frames. And we're going to put the left and right quarter windows into place using some clear part cement. And also the right side the window can go into position at this time too. To test fit the hood, my sample, I took a little bit off of the edges to make sure that it still fit well after paint, and then that's painted the same color as the body and detailed with some flat black on the underside. Now the windshield can be installed into the body assembly with some of that clear part cement, and the number 8 decal is applied to the bottom of the hood, and 15 and 4 of the number 66s are applied to the top, and then decal 31 to the left fender of the body assembly. Final decals to add to the tires and wheels, and number 44 decals applied to the 4 tires, and then 28 and 27s added to the outer wheels, and that's it. As you can see, this is an outstanding looking NASCAR kit of the modern version, and it looks great on the shelf. One of the few examples of a Chevy SS model, and if I were you, I'd buy one and put it on my shelf. We hope you liked this step-by-step premium model kit review, and so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. But you can find us on Facebook, and our website is rightonreplicas.com. Thanks.